Hello, welcome back to the Empower Students Now podcast. My name is Amanda Werner and I am your host. In today's episode, I am going to be talking about, I'm not sure how many reasons, because this is a little bit of an off-the-cuff type of episode, because I'm leaning into being less of a perfectionist and just coming on and talking off the cuff about my experiences being diagnosed with autism and ADHD as an adult. And it's messy. This is just a messy topic. And so these episodes are just less organized than others from the past. And I hope that they're still valuable to you. So today's episode, I'm going to talk about what exactly made me suspect that I could be autistic. What is it that caused me to begin to become more and more convinced, so convinced that I realized it was time for me to go seek a professional who does this for a living, diagnoses various conditions for a living, and go through the whole process and spend a lot of money and a lot of time taking all sorts of psychometric tests and things to get a formal diagnosis of autism. And I do want to talk about that process as well in another episode. And I think that all of this is very relevant to teachers because teachers work with kids. And I think that this information can be so incredibly helpful to understanding students' behavior, whether or not they're diagnosed with autism. There's an excellent book called Uniquely Human, and it is a book about how all autistic behaviors are human behaviors. They're just more extreme. That's all. That's all. Autistic behaviors are human behaviors. It's just more intense and more extreme for autistic people. And so that can cause challenges. Welcome to the Empower Students Now podcast, a podcast about equity, neurodiversity, mindfulness, and student engagement. There's a lot that needs to change in our education system. The good news is teachers have the power to make these changes now. So the first reason that I started to suspect that I was autistic is because my kid was diagnosed with autism in 2021. It's 2026 now. And when they were diagnosed, I started doing a lot of research. I started just deep diving into this topic because I wasn't really very knowledgeable about the topic at all. I had very little background in what autism even was. And it took about a year for my kid to be diagnosed. It took a long time. We were on a big, long waiting list. And it's a process. And my kid was also diagnosed with ADHD. I'm also diagnosed with ADHD. So we're both ADHD. I think, and I really, it's hard for me sometimes to talk about this because I really care a lot about my family's privacy. So I really want to make this about me because I really do want to talk openly about all of these things. It is my way of unmasking to be able to talk openly about my experience being autistic. And so, so the first, I'm still trying to be organized about all of this. The first reason that I suspected I was autistic is because my kid was diagnosed. And then as I began to research the causes, and my kid even was asking, why do I have this? How did this happen? Who gave this to me? I'm I don't know. But the more that I researched, the more that I learned that it's genetic, that there is actually research and science, well-established science around where autism comes from. And it comes from your parents, one or the other. Sometimes it's, I don't know. I don't necessarily believe this. I think a lot of people are in denial about their autism, or they don't want, and I respect that. I do respect people who don't want a stigmatized, misunderstood label attached to their name at all. Like, I get that completely and totally. But I think that the way to combat, the stigmatism and the myths and the misunderstandings is by embracing the label and then talking openly about the experience of that label and, busting those myths. Okay, so that's the first reason. The second reason that I began to suspect that I was autistic is when I was diagnosed with ADHD. I was diagnosed with the combination type, which is hyperactive and inattentive. I did not relate with the disorganization. Like, a lot of ADHD people talk a lot about how they have a hard time managing their lives, and their things, their stuff, in their houses, apartments, where they live, their classrooms, just everything scattered, losing things all the time, right? Like, none of that applied to me at all. Like, I just felt like, and even if you go back and listen to my episode from, I think it was 2022 or something, about when I was diagnosed with ADHD, I even named that. I was like, but I'm really, really organized. And I'm not just organized like normal organization. I am overly organized and overly, I really don't want to use the word obsessed, but it's like the only word that can really capture what I'm talking about here, in that I am uncomfortable, very, very uncomfortable in cluttered environments that are messy, environments that have flaws. Like, if a picture is sort of even a tiny bit off-centered in someone's house, it bothers me. When there's books that are on a bookshelf and they're not they're not perfectly organized, it really, really bothers me. And I'm laughing because it's kind of funny, like, how much time I've spent throughout my life organizing and sorting things and putting things in order. It feels so calming to put my environment in order. And I often will use organization and like cleaning as a way to procrastinate. And by the way, I'm not suggesting, because there are people out there that are like that. And I'm not suggesting that just because you're like that you're autistic. Okay. I'm not suggesting that at all. So please don't assume that. To be autistic, you have to have all these other traits as well, right? Not all of them, but you have to have like characteristics that are in the DSM-5 in order to be diagnosed. But even the DSM-5, this is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that psychiatrists use to diagnose all sorts of things, right? Like schizophrenia, ADHD, borderline personality disorder. So the DSM-5, it lists, all of the symptoms is what they're usually called, but I like to call them traits, because it's not a disease. I don't believe that autism or ADHD are diseases or illnesses. Like, people call them mental illnesses. I just don't, that's not how I view them. I view them as just differences in the way that the brain functions. Okay. So that was the second reason that I started to suspect that I might be autistic, is that the ADHD traits didn't fully capture my experience. And then the third thing that I started to discover through my research is, well, I learned a lot about the history of the DSM-5, and about how Asperger's it used to capture people who were autistic that did not have an intellectual disability, and that word was used for that category of autistic people. But then the DSM-5 took that off pretty recently. I think it was like 2013 or I don't quote me on that date. I don't have any research in front of me right now. I'm like estimating in my head, which I do have like working memory problems, right, with ADHD. So, but it was taken off and just collapsed into like, this is all autism, right? It's like this huge spectrum. And then also intellectual disability was separated out too. So like someone with autism doesn't always need to have an intellectual disability to be autistic. And often, and I learned this through a book called Unmasking Autism by Devin Price, autism, people who are not diagnosed with autism until they're adults, it's because they don't have an intellectual disability. So they have an average IQ or above average IQ. And I don't know what my IQ is. I don't really want to know what my IQ is. I've learned that those tests are fairly limited in what they can really capture in a person's mind, because there's many different ways that you can have high intelligence that the IQ tests don't really test for, like creativity, for example. But anyways, so I learned that there are a lot of people that are not diagnosed with autism. And the reason they're not diagnosed, they qualify probably when you look at the DSM-5 and all the traits, but they don't have an intellectual disability. And so they've been able to function fairly well with probably a lot of challenges and masking. And so that's the third thing that sort of started to make me suspect I might be autistic, because I don't have an intellectual disability. But I did do an episode in the past that you could go check out about my sister who came on the show, and I can put a link in the show notes, who was diagnosed with a learning disability in third grade. And so, this is genetic, right? So like, and I think that also my sister and what my sister went through and her bravery and coming on and talking about all of that on my podcast it's like gives me goosebumps. But just knowing sort of the history of my family and my own family's behavior and my own family's challenges started to make me suspect autism. And I also, like, I really resonated with, that autistic people can actually do pretty well in school, actually, if they don't have an intellectual disability and don't have challenges with like reading or, like dyslexia. My sister has self-diagnosed as dyslexic. And I don't think really resonates as much with the learning disability label that the schools gave her. Another reason that I started to suspect that I was autistic is my childhood. I'm the firstborn. So I'm the oldest of my siblings. I have a sister and a brother who are younger than me. And I had a very challenging time as a kid, mostly in middle school, and it continued on in high school as well. But I was incredibly rebellious. I did a lot of things that I wasn't supposed to do. And I don't want to go into those things because I just don't. It's embarrassing. I did a lot of things that I shouldn't have done at a very young age. I was like 11 and 12 when I was acting out a lot. I mean, I guess I could name a few things that I did. And I fought a lot with my parents. I was very argumentative. I ran away from home quite a few times. It was rough. I mean, my parents, they laugh now, but they talk about how like they're lucky they're still married today because the things that I put them through, I think they considered getting a divorce. I'm laughing, but it's like, what else do you do? I mean, is that I also have like a very like a dark sense of humor. Like I'll laugh at things that are sort of serious. And I think that's a little bit of a sign of autism as well. But so that was another thing that really started to make me think, okay, yeah, this explains a lot about why you were the way you were as a kid. I also had a really hard time socially as a kid, middle school, high school, and even as an adult. I was very possessive of my friends. I only could handle one friend and at a time. And so I sort of went from like one really intense friendship to another one, like over the years, like people would kind of come and go. And I moved a lot. My parents were in the Navy. But in middle and high school, we stayed in one place. We lived in one place. I'm from Whidbey Island. My parents still live there in Washington State. And so those times I say I grew up there because we moved there when I was in 6th grade. And that's really when a lot of the trouble started, when I started puberty. And then that brings me to the next reason that I began to believe that I was autistic before I was diagnosed. I read a book called Girls and Women on the Autism Spectrum. I learned so much from that book. And one of the things that I learned is that girls and women, and this can also be trans girls too, right? They are much more interested in socializing. And I mean, I'm not saying boys aren't. Boys can be too. Autistic boys can be much more interested in socializing as well. But there's this quality to the female autistic experience. And the book talks about a female phenotype that is different from the boy phenotype that's more captured by the DSM-5 symptoms or traits that are listed. And for girls and women, because socializing they're more motivated to have friends and to socialize, they're often not diagnosed because their behavior seems more normal. Another thing is their special interests or their hyper-focused areas are more accepted socially. So boys who are autistic, their interests are often, I'm not saying all the time, like I can't make a blanket statement about all autistic boys, but they are often interested in objects like trains or coding, computer coding, or cars, things like that, like object oriented, whereas girls and women are more animal and people oriented in their interests. And this really made a lot of sense to me because I believe that as a kid, my special interest was people and understanding people and psychology and understanding why people did what they did and basically just doing everything I could in my power to fit in. Studying famous people, studying the popular group, trying to emulate them. These are things that were listed and talked about in this book. And I'm like, what? This lady is describing me. And so it just became more and more clear. And then, one of the, I think, things that people, when they hear autism or hear that someone is autistic or has autism, They think, well, what about your sensory sensitivities? Where do you fall in that area, Amanda? And I have a lot of them. And autism really explains it to me. I have a lot of skin issues. My skin, it, it's very, very uncomfortable. Like right now, I feel my hands are really dry, and it's annoying. It feels painful, and I have to like use lotion a lot, which some people don't like. Some autistic people I know hate lotion because it feels yucky and gross on their skin, right? Like, but also just light, like bright rooms, bright lights have always, always, always bothered me. I don't really like, we have these like, what are those called? Recessant lights all over our house. And they're just like shining right directly on top of me. And it's really, I hate it. It bothers me. Just that sense of feeling annoyed all the time. Being annoyed by clothing, being annoyed by like just my pants and the way that they feel around my waist. I've always been really, really sensitive to just the way that my clothes feel on my body. But I've also worn really uncomfortable things because I wanted to fit in really, really desperately. And so, I mean, I could go on and on about sensory sensitivities. I'm also a very, very modest person, and I always have been, and just felt like girly clothes and girly things make me very uncomfortable. And they always have. I mean, I've definitely felt like a tomboy growing up, but nowadays I think that if I were a kid and the term non-binary existed, I would have felt a lot of that would have resonated with me back then. Yeah. So, and I learned from this book, Girls and Women on the Autism Spectrum, that women who are autistic are often androgynous, meaning they're not very feminine and they're not very masculine either. Or let me put it a different way. I don't feel like that's the best way. They're both. I mean, and there are studies that have shown that autistic people often have more of a dysphoria experience, a feeling of I don't really know what my gender is. And I've always felt that way as well. I've always felt like I got along with boys more than girls. Girls have always been really intimidating women to me. I've always felt like they are mean. Because I've been bullied a lot, and I was bullied a lot. And there's another reason that I started to believe that I was autistic is I've experienced a lot of bullying. I actually had to leave a school in 8th grade because of how severe the bullying got. And there's more. I mean, there's so much more. I think that the more that I hear other autistic people's experiences, the more that I became convinced that I was also autistic. And I mean, I think that deep diving into these subject areas for years and years and years, and just being someone who is like extremely passionate, and just constantly learning and absorbing information about my interests, those interests being psychology, education, and neurodivergence. I think that all of these are really big signs that led me to get a formal diagnosis. And so I can talk more about that in the next episode, like what that process was like and what it's been like for me to get a diagnosis. But I do want to bring this back to your classroom and the students in your classroom, because a lot of the characteristics that I have named here, you might be seeing in your students or even yourself. And I think that when kids have struggles socializing, when they are rebellious, when they're defiant, when they might seem self-absorbed or self-interested or only interested in one area, or they seem over passionate about that area of interest, like you might start to think like, this kid could be autistic. This kid might be on the spectrum. And guess what? You might be right, but you can't say anything to them, right? You can't, because, I've had this over and over again. People tell me, you can't diagnose people, Amanda. You're not a doctor. That's not your specialty. And they're right. Like, I'm not a doctor. I'm not someone who can just like go and diagnose a person. I can't. But I can take into account a student's struggles in my classroom, and I can start to understand maybe, and I'm saying maybe, because maybe this person you suspect, this kid or these kids in your class, maybe you suspect they're autistic, and maybe they are autistic. Use what you've learned about autism and use best teaching practices for these kids, whether or not they're autistic. These practices of support for neurodivergent children, kids who are ADHD or autistic, kids who are and kids who aren't benefit from these practices. All kids benefit from these practices, these accommodations. I'm going to tell you some of them now. One of them is being patient and kind and empathetic to these kids, being vigilant in your classroom around bullying and harassment, and noticing if that's happening in your classroom and putting a stop to it. Helping kids who are struggling socially by offering them resources at your school, even if they don't have a diagnosis. Like there are counselors at our schools for a reason, like there's friendship buddy groups and clubs and things like that at schools for a reason. And so you can offer these resources to kids, because sometimes kids don't even know that these resources exist within a school. Allowing kids to use headphones when they're stressed out to listen to music, offering them alternative options and choices, offering shorter assignments, excusing certain assignments that you think this kid might not really benefit from doing this, offering kids like special seating for, like maybe they're more comfortable with this one friend, like allowing them to sit, in flexible seats, not necessarily in a desk, allowing them to move around, allowing them to stand in the back of the classroom if they need that. It's not just kids that are diagnosed that could benefit from these things. And that's the point that I really want to push here, is that all kids benefit from accommodations. And you don't have to have a diagnosis to benefit from it. So that's where I'm going to leave this episode for now. I hope it was helpful. I hope you learned a lot. I will put links to the books I mentioned in the show notes. And if you thought this was helpful and beneficial, share it with someone you know. Thank you, as always, for listening. Bye-bye.